So, welcome everybody to Your Irish Connection. We're having chats about how we do these Irish spirituality things. And we are going for our second round with author Mórrígan Daimler, whose name I have learned to pronounce since the last round. It was September 2016, I think, when we did our last one. So we're in October 2017 now. And I didn't realize actually when we scheduled this, it was just because, you know, we're both busy and mothers and all the rest of it, and we just scheduled at a mutually beneficial time. But we did realize after that tonight is the dark moon, and it is the start of my particular Samhain observation would be from dark moon to dark moon, so 28 days of a Samhain cycle, and that kicks off tonight. So it's quite fortuitous and good omens and all the rest of it. I think that we would do this interview here and now. So you're very welcome, Mórrígan.
Yay, it's good to be back. I had a lot of fun last time.
Yeah, and since we've done our last interview, we have met in person a couple of times, so I was able to pull up some new pictures of us. I don't think we were drunk in any of those, were we?
No, I actually don't drink.
Oh yeah, okay.
I'm definitely never drunk in any pictures.
I don't think I was drunk in any of those. I think that one in the Pantheacon suite was before the mead making, I'm pretty sure.
That look on my face is complete exhaustion, by the way. So jet lagged. It was sad.
Yeah, that was an intense conference. Are you going back to Pantheacon in February?
Not next year. No. Pantheacon, I enjoy it, and I actually really, the last time I went, I had a great time with it. It's quite a financial outlay for me. And you know, I'm sort of limited with my options in that area. So it's not something I'm really in a position to do very often. So I don't know when I'd be able to do it again. Yeah,
well, I'm kind of the same. I mean, it was a bit of a shock for me going over to Pantheacon because, I put it this way: it would be an American model to make the speakers pay for entry to a conference. That's kind of not the done thing here. It's not that it's not done anywhere else, but it's that kind of commercial mindset where I would be of the opinion that no conference or, you know, magazine or event or anything like that runs without the content creators and teachers and contributors. So you feckin' look after them. You don't charge them through the nose for the privilege of attending your conference. So I'm a little bit bitter about that, I have to say. And I'm probably not the only one, but it's so unusual for me, and it's so kind of outside my sense of, as an event organizer, it's outside my sense of how I would take care, or how I always have taken care of my guests and my speakers and the hospitality that goes with that. I would never dream of charging anybody who was giving up their time or their energy or, their personal finances. I mean, I would do my level best, even at a community level, I would do my best to at least cover expenses, even if I can't pay a fee,
Yeah.
So all of that being said, I did go to Pantheacon for the last 3 years, and I'm kind of done now, I have to say, for a while. Anyway, I'm taking a break off traveling for next year because I really need to kind of ground in a little bit and sort some stuff out at home. So have you any other events that you're considering or for 2018?
Next year is actually pretty busy comparatively for me. I don't really do much. That sounds bad.
Do so much. Oh my God.
I don't really travel much. Rephrase this. I don't really travel much, and I don't really do a lot of the larger events. I have done Pantheacon twice, only once as a presenter, although the first time I went, I kind of got drafted by ADF, Arnuic Fane, which is the largest Druid organization here in the US. So I ended up actually doing some rogue workshops, I guess you would say. in their hospitality suite. And then I went back last year, as you'd mentioned, and was on the schedule and did several. But next year, I have promised Vivian that I will apply to go to Mystic South, which is a newer event. I actually was supposed to be presenting at it last year, but finances intervened, and I had to withdraw. So I'm going to reapply, and if they choose my workshops, then I promised Vivian I would do that next year. And one must never break a promise to Vivian.
No, Vivian is our goddess. We do not break promises to Vivian. In case anybody's not aware, Vivian that we keep referring to is Vivian Armstrong of Land Sea Sky Travel, who's a friend of ours but also a colleague. I've known her for many years as a tourism professional when I was working in the industry here in Ireland, and she was leading tours, and that's how I met her. And she's just a big ball of amazing, basically, and we love her very much. So references to Vivian are that Vivian. Okay,
she is all the awesome. And speaking of Vivian, my other things that I'm doing next year, I'll be hopefully returning to Ireland in the spring.
Yay!
Yay! Super excited about that. We have a tour of Southwest Ireland planned for Bealtaine, which I'm really excited about because you just don't see very much tourist trip wise for sacred sites, pagan kind of things down in that area. And everything seems to always focus more central and, that sort of east to west band in the middle. And then sometimes a little, up into Ulster, which is awesome. There's some great sites all through those locations, but there just doesn't seem to be as much pagan attention to the Southwest. So we're going there. I'll put it. I'm super excited about that. It's places that you just don't see pagan sacred sites tours focusing on very much. And then in the fall next year, September of next year, I'm going to be going to Iceland. Also with Vivian and Land Sea Sky Travel to do a sacred sites tour in Iceland, which is another thing that you don't see very much of.
That is awesome. You and the elves and Vivian. Oh my God, it's just going to be epic.
Pancakes and socks, yes.
Yeah, and I'm very excited about the Bealtaine tour for the reasons that you mentioned. Obviously, I'm a Connacht lass by heart and by nature, but I've moved down to Waterford, so I'm down around this area, and I was very excited when Vivian was over. She's just finished a tour. She had a month traveling around between Ireland and Wales, and she had. She was doing some scouting down around the Beara Peninsula in that area, and just checking out some of the sites, and some of the stuff coming out of there is just stunning. Like I knew that whole area is gorgeous, even for Ireland. Ireland levels of gorgeous. It's super gorgeous, but yeah, I'm very excited to be involved in that because I will be doing at least one day, I think, one day and one class with that tour. And I think there might be an offering. I'm talking to Vivian about doing stuff on either side of it. So yeah, if anybody's interested, it's definitely worth looking up. But I'm very excited to see you guys again. Yeah, because
coming back.
When you were here, you came to Rathcroghan. Which tour was that? They're all kind of blending into one. What month was that this year?
That was October. Of last year. We actually was there. We were. That's my ability to speak coherent English today. Sorry. We were there for Samhain last year, and we were there on the dark moon.
Yes.
And that picture of you and me on the right of the screen was us at Rathcroghan.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's the main round, is it? Or was that?
Yeah, that was at the main mound.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That was an amazing tour. I forgot that you were here at Sound because you were up at Tlachta as well, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, at Sound. So that was really cool. Do you want to tell us about that?
That's a long story.
Okay, we'll just
very intense.
How about we go to my first question, because that might actually feed into this. So, how do you feel that your practice has changed since you physically visited Ireland? Because obviously well, not obviously, but if for anybody who's seen the last one, the last interview that we did, you hadn't at that point, and you were on the way the following month. So did it change, or do you feel that I know it changed, so it's a loaded question, but tell our audience, Morgan, how you feel your practice has changed since you physically set, feet on the ground here.
Yeah. Such a complicated question. Well, I mean, and as anyone who's like read my books or my blog knows, I have always put a good amount of focus on the Aishi, or the fairies, as we call them in English. So that was always like a major factor for me. But I'd also very much considered myself a polytheist, specifically focusing on the Irish gods, generally meaning the Tuatha Dé Danann, particularly Macha and the Mórrígan, and Bive. So the whole reason I was going on the tour last year was the Mórrígan Secret Place tour, and it was part of the tour. I think it was one of Vivian's tours. We're going to keep raising Cosmos Vivian throughout this. I think she had set it up, so she had us hitting really all of the sites we wanted to, for Mórrígan, and for Bive and for Macha. So sort of before going to Ireland, the pre-Ireland segment, if you had asked me, I would have said that my practice included the probably, sort of on your average time. And I tell people, like, whatever it is that you expect to happen when you go to Ireland, probably not what's going to happen there. I think you have to approach that sort of thing with an open mind and just, not have any preconceived notions. So of course, me being me, I did it all wrong, and I had a ton of preconceived expectations, not so much for what, Ireland itself was going to be like, but for what the experience was going to be like. And I'd sort of envisioned that it was going to be this very deep connection, and Macha in particular, she's the main goddess that I was connected to. And that, as they say, sideways pretty much immediately. When we got there, I had a very difficult time connecting at all with the gods, per se. It became something very different than what I expected. And then, of course, on Samhain, we were at Tlachta for the Fire Festival in Athboy, which was an amazing, amazing experience. It's really even hard to put into words. I mean, there were something like 2,000 people there, I think, that night. And it was just really hard to describe. And we had gone to the cave the day before, Onagat, the Cave of Cats, the Mórrígan's cave. And that had also been a very intense experience for me. And Roth Cohen right before that. I'm telling this all backwards.
Okay.
Chronologically. Sorry about that. It ended up really becoming an experience that just shifted me entirely into focusing on the she, which I had not at all expected when I got on the plane to go over there. So that's a significant change in my practice since then. I mean, I still acknowledge the gods, I haven't stopped acknowledging them, but the connection is very different now. So yeah, Ireland.
And what does that look like then, when you say that your practice has shifted? Like, what are the changes from going to a polytheist kind of practice or devotional practice to working with the Aishi? Like, is it just that, your offerings are made to different beings, or has there been more kind of fundamental changes to, how and why you work even?
A little bit of both. I had always made offerings to both, and I think we had talked about that the last time.
Yeah.
But it used to be I would pretty much make daily acknowledgement of the gods, particularly Macha and the Mórrígan, and Nuada, who's another one that I was very close to in my practice. And that has definitely changed. I just don't feel as closely connected to them. To use a sort of awkward analogy here, if we were talking about human friendships, I would say that, like, before they were close friends that I would see every day, and now it's become more of a acquaintances kind of situation. I more acknowledge and honor them on significant holy days, the fire festivals in particular, or if something comes up where I feel like they want a little extra attention. And that's a pretty seismic shift for me. Whereas when it came to the Aishi, that had been more of a once a week, offering them some milk, to sort of stay on their good side, as it were. I highly encourage everyone to stay on their good side, just a safer way to operate. And that's now become more of a daily thing. And since coming back from Ireland, I've actually written 2 books for them. They've kind of hijacked me pretty effectively. So, that's just the energy and the amount of focus has definitely shifted primarily in that direction. I'm trying not to let it become 100% where that's all that I'm ever focusing on or writing about, but
yeah. And obviously your blog is as prolific as ever, and thank you again for that. There's some amazing resources up there, but there has been a noticeable kind of shift in, where I would have said previously it was primarily kind of translation stuff with, a flavor of a bit of everything or whatever takes your fancy thrown in, where it does seem to be shift towards she traditions, not just Irish, of course, but various Celtic countries. Would seem to be the primary focus these days now. And again, nobody's complaining, but it is just something that I've noticed. Has that been a deliberate attempt, or am I off the mark there, would you say?
I don't know that it's deliberate on my part. I do think it's definitely a result of last October, and going to Ireland. It's sort of when your spirituality ends up having that kind of massive shift happen to it, it's hard not to find other aspects of your life sort of echoing that. I do keep meaning to get back more to the translation stuff. Some of that has just been time issues. I keep shockingly sort of overcommitting.
Nobody was surprised. Nobody was surprised.
So I keep taking on a little too many, see again with the horrible English grammar. I keep taking on a few too many outside writing projects, And the translation stuff, which I adore doing, it is more time consuming. I have to really sit down and put some effort to make sure that I'm doing it correctly. Because I am an amateur translator and not someone who has 8 years at university and a degree, an advanced degree.
Point of note, you're doing more than somebody who has 8 years at university and an advanced degree, and the only reason you're an amateur is because people aren't specifically paying you to translate rather than, a professional. I would definitely kind of take issue with that, Morgan. You're as professional as anybody I've ever met.
There is a lot of very odd, I don't know quite the word, I don't want to say snobbery exactly, but particularly when it comes to Celtic studies, if you don't have a degree, and it doesn't matter how bad you are at it, if you have a degree and you can say I have a degree in whatever from the 1980s and I have no idea what I'm talking about now, people do tend to give that a lot more weight.
Yeah, stupid people.
Yeah, well, I taught myself Old Irish and now I do translations because it really interests me. So, I'm just trying to be upfront with people. I do not have a degree. Although if anyone wants to pay for me to go to the University of Cork, I am okay with that.
UCC would be lucky to have you in any of their programs. I can absolutely guarantee you that. And I'm sure only delighted to have you. And Team Bled there on the chat says that she pays you for translations, and everybody should too. So you are a professional translator, not an amateur by that definition. And I would also like to kind of chime in on that. I can think of 3 or 4 authors off the top of my head, pagan authors who have, that piece of paper that says that they are Celtic, Celtic studies qualified, and yeah, I'm going to you every time. So I think somebody wrote on the screen here. I don't know what's going on. I have 2 degrees, and your translations are. Oh, I bet that was Kathy. Kathy, write it in the chat. I don't know what you did.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, and I think the translation work is very important, and we talked about this last time too, towards the end. Most of the translations that are out there, not all, Story Archaeology, which is a wonderful podcast and website, has been doing some really good newer translations. But a lot of the translations that are out there that are really easily accessible are really old, and were done by translators generally in the Victorian era. And we all know my passionate love of Victorian translators. And they just have a lot of issues going on with them. Even ignoring the fact that a lot of them just don't deal with material that was considered too obscure or too difficult. The Roscana, the poems that are in the different pieces, they usually would just not do those at all. You get a series of ellipses, just not included. But even beyond that, they would translate things with their own sort of lens in place. So if they thought it was too inappropriate or too sexual, or what have you, they just wouldn't deal with it. Or they would sort of edit it. They would add things in, they would take things out.
Sanitize it.
Yeah. And, people read it today and then they're like, well, no, in this myth it says this is what happened. It's like, well, it actually doesn't say that though. And I'm sort of a big stickler for people having good resources, to grasp what the stories actually are or what they were, originally.
Yeah, and that's really important. And I mean, as part of my work, what I would do is like retellings. One of the things that I do for my Patreon rewards is the Tales of Old Ireland. So it's retelling.
I love those.
Thank you. Retelling the stories. But it could be, it could be anything from just an inspiration that I get from a site, or occasionally it's actually what I would, I suppose, call channeling channeling a story based on my going around crazy adventures around Ireland. But a lot of the time it's looking at that original source material and really trying to get a sense of, intuitionally. So it's very much kind of my personal gnosis, but having those resources available and having your translations and Isál Carmody, would be yourself and Isál Carmody would be the two I suppose most available translators that I would trust the most. And I would always go to Kathy there, who's in the chat there as well, for any kind of academic check-in that I need. But having those resources available means that I can actually, step solidly forward with exploration, or intuitional exploration particularly, and spiritual exploration and energetic exploration, because the foundations are firm, and it's a good solid base from which to build a practice. And I think that's absolutely vital, and I think the work you're doing is absolutely vital. So thank you again. In case I haven't said it in the last 5 minutes, thank you again for the work that you do.
Well, and I think you're touching on something which is such an essential point. And it's something particularly with this shift that I've had into more of the fairy lore, the fairy folklore end of things, that people have a really hard time grasping that it's actually a wonderful and good thing to write new stories and to sort of reimagine the old stories in new settings. Like I love John's blog where he tells like the new Dagda stories. And that we actually need that in order for, it to evolve and to move forward. You need to have that fresh infusion of stories.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it has to be grounded in the actual culture, and that's the problem that we're having, just using the universal we here, is that so many people, particularly in the pagan community, are moving forward and reimagining things, but without that grounding, without that basis in the actual culture, and the traditional stories and the traditional lore. And sorry, I'm getting distracted trying to read what you're typing.
Don't. I'm just putting in links.
And what ends up happening is that people are, instead of forwarding sort of the existing folklore and bringing it into a new century, which is essential, they're just making stuff up.
Yeah.
And then they're calling it folklore or they're calling it mythology. And it's not, because it doesn't have that root in the tradition, in the culture. And it's actually a significant problem.
Yeah.
It makes me insane. It's a large degree.
We have talked about this often, Morgan. We're very much on the same page there. And from my perspective, and I think from a lot of, the perspective of a lot of Irish people, I definitely don't think I'm alone in this. There's a huge element of appropriation then as well that comes into that, where, we're getting better, certainly as communities, about being aware of cultural appropriation when it comes to now. Oh my goodness, we're not in any way there yet, but there is definitely more awareness around the work of people of color and their communities and their native traditions, the Native American, the First Tribes or First Nations people from your continent. And there is that kind of awareness around there, and I'm not sure that it's kind of extended really yet into the the Celtic, to use that very, very loose term. You know how I feel about Celtic. It's a very loose term, very loose term. But to use that general umbrella term, which is how it's supposed to be used, really. When you look at the Celtic cultural elements that are people are just taking them and twisting them, and as you say, totally out of context for both the historical culture, but also the current alive, being lived, experienced culture that has continued, long after your ancestors left the island here. And our voices here on the island have been dismissed for many, many years. We haven't had a voice in any of that. So, those are all really important elements to kind of consider, and that's why I feel that your work is valuable, and that's why I started doing the work that I did, because it used to make me so freaking mad to see these people who haven't a feckin' notion and hadn't a feckin' notion that it's pure ego and pomp and ceremony, and they're just prancing around pretending to be Irish, or pretending to be whatever. And there's no rooting. They haven't done the research into the resources, as we've said, and into the lore, that foundation that we talked about. They haven't done that kind of grounding, but they also haven't done the kind of grounding of, okay, yes, getting feet on the land over here is really important, but not everybody can do that, obviously, for all sorts of reasons. And I would never be ableist or classist or anything like that, and presuming that every person has to travel to Ireland. But there are resources available, and again, that's why I started doing the work that I did, was to try and get that kind of authentic connection, and make it available for people, because it's just so out of context. Even when you're looking at the historical stuff, as you saw when you came here, you could study all the books on the Sidhe and all the folklore and all the rest of it, but when you're working with them directly, and when you see how they still exist and still are very much a part of the land and the communities here, whether they're kind of acknowledged or unacknowledged. And I think they remain largely unacknowledged until something goes wrong, and then everybody kind of acknowledges that they're still here. That's very real and very prevalent here in Ireland. You really start to get a sense when you talk to actual Irish people and experience things in that way. You really start to get a sense of the reality of it, and that is such a, there seems to be, sorry, it's a bit of a ramble, but there seems to be this division currently in, people who don't want to go back and look at the source material and don't want to do any work, to be completely feckin' harsh about it. They're not interested in doing any work, and they're all, tripping around talking about personal gnosis, and it's just as valid as anything. And yes, personal gnosis is absolutely as valid as anything else, for you personally, but I would have to question anybody's personal gnosis, including my own, including yours, Morgan, including anybody's, if it hasn't got that foundation and that grounding in that context, in the culture, in the source material, because that has to be the platform and the stepping stone that we work from, because otherwise we're just fucking fooling ourselves, as far as I can see,
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that people don't appreciate about having that grounding, is that it acts like a checks and balances system.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a personal gnosis moment, you sort of automatically have that filter in place of a context for it. When you don't have that grounding in any sort of cultural context or any framework for it, then sort of all personal gnosis becomes equally valid, even if it isn't. And something that I've written about before myself is that, spirits lie. Different types of beings that you might encounter are not always well-meaning.
The fairies are fucking tricksy bastards.
And, just because we get something in personal gnosis, or just because we have an experience, it might be a genuine experience, but it might not be for our benefit. It might not be something that's to our well-being. If I'm explaining this all right.
Yeah, no, you are.
Because it's so many people operate from this theory that every gnosis is equally valid and every spirit we contact is completely trustworthy and out to help us. You know, and I think if you have that cultural grounding, which sort of ingrains in you, no,
Mm-hmm.
you know, then you don't just automatically trust everything and see everything as validated without running it through that check system. I think that's one benefit of having the cultural grounding. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, like that kind of, as you're saying, like, you know, all personal gnosis would be just as valid without that context. I mean, that's so important. And I think, you know, to be perfectly honest, like that's what a lot of people want. They want to just be able to do whatever. And I'm sorry, it's not good enough. It's, you know, we have so many resources at our disposal, both in, you know, time and internet resources and financial resources. You know, there's more available to people than there ever was. You know, both free and paid, depending on your personal circumstances, whatever. There is absolutely no excuse for not putting the bit of work in and the bit of effort in, you know, to figure this out. And because there is stuff available at every level, from complete and utter, you know, bog standard beginner to, you know, up to academic third level, you know, all that snobbery, that whole pool of stuff. There's so much available, and there's so many people working so hard to try and make it accessible, and to try and make sure it's accessible, and to try and kind of not just preserve, but also grow what's here, you know, and keep it a living culture, and keep it, you know, a living spiritual tradition, which is so important. Like, you can't have this kind of snapshot mentality. You can't just, well, you can, but you're wrong. You know, but I forget where I was going with that. But yes, anyway, rant over.
There's plenty of people that if you try to suggest that something isn't, you know, a good idea, they'll try to tell you, oh, well, you know, the Celts died out 2,000 years ago, so, you know, it's fine to just make it up. And it's so enormously disrespectful.
Hello, you know? Hello, right. We're like right here,
right?
Fucking hell.
But it's just a way to justify, you know, doing what they want to do anyway. To say can because it's a dead culture, which obviously is completely untrue. And
you know, to kind of bring the other element back to cultural appropriation into it, you know, Americans and English, but you know, Americans kind of have this silent layer of colonialism, and that is built into your culture. You know, it's that consumer culture, but that is built on your colonial heritage. And working spiritually and energetically, that has to be acknowledged, and that has to be, you know, that is something that you need to be aware of. You know, the same as you're aware of your privilege, or you're aware of anything, you know, you need to keep working on that. You need to really root that shit out, because it's so pervasive in your culture that you feel like you just, and I mean, you generally, obviously I'm horrifically generalizing, but you know, there's a lot of Americans, and this would be the overwhelming experience that I've had in my, you know, however many decades of dealing with American spiritual communities. There is this baseline entitlement that comes with just your, you know, your past and your ancestry and your history, that you really have to be very, very on top of, you know, that you don't come in and just feel that you can just take what you want, you know, and use it however you want and change it however you want, because fuck no, can you do that with anybody else's culture?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, I was going to use the word entitlement as well, but you beat me to it.
Yeah.
No, it is. It's a sense of entitlement, and the idea that if you like something, then you don't have to really understand it, or the concepts behind it, you can just sort of take it and do what you want with it. And I do want to address a question that I caught down in the chat while we were talking. I don't think there's anything wrong with making it up. Yeah, you definitely don't want to call it what it isn't, which I think is more where the problem comes in. Like a lot of my personal practice is based out of experimentation and gnosis. But I'm pretty honest about what it is. I don't call it, Irish fairycraft. I don't call it, Celtic witchcraft. I start most of my books on the witchcraft that I practice by specifying this is my thing that I made up based on how I've done things, for an amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the difference, is when you're being honest and saying, I made it up. But these are sort of the threads that I'm using, and you're respectful of the source material and the culture. And you're not saying, well, I just really liked, this one particular little thing, and I didn't research it or try to understand it or talk to anyone in the culture about it. I just thought it looked neat, so now I'm going to do it or use it. That's a problem.
That is a big problem. And it's a problem. Conceptually, it's a problem, but it's a very real problem that we're facing every day as well. One of the comments here, how many times has the Wild Hunt, I don't read the Wild Hunt, so I don't know, but how many times has the Wild Hunt run articles about Irish and Celtic stuff and not reached out to any Irish or Welsh people? Almost every time, as far as I've seen. I think we did have there was one article on the Wild Hunt that was pagan life rights, about pagan life rights maybe. And they did reach out to us for that, but I know that they ran an article on our first pagan politician, which is Deirdre Wadding. I don't think they reached out. Well, I didn't see anybody Irish quoted in that specifically, so I don't know. But yeah, it's an ongoing problem, which, again, with that kind of awareness, it's at that kind of pervasive level of the colonial mentality, if you like, that usually goes unchecked. It's coming from a place of privilege and a place of entitlement, as we've said. So there's a question here from Delia, which is, as someone living outside of Ireland who has visited now, how does one address the other political stuff that we bring from our colonizing and colonized past? That one's for you specifically. I'm not sure if I 100% understand that question.
I'm not sure how to answer that.
Yeah. Maybe put in, just to clarify that.
Yeah, the question of colonization is actually really complicated for me. I'm a member of the Cherokee Nation, which I realize is not easy to tell looking at me. But I am a registered tribal member on my father's side. I also, my grandfather was from Cork. So my dad's side of the family is a little complicated when it comes to, unpacking colonialism. Because we have a, first generation immigrant, and then we have Native American. My mother's side of the family came over on the Mayflower, so that's a lot of colonialism going on in New England. Yes, that is a great reason to come to Cork. You have uncovered a secret reason for this entire Southwest Ireland tour. But yeah, it makes it very complicated, I think, for people in America, particularly mixed race people.
Yeah.
If I can speak to that for a moment, when you have heritage that's very directly on both sides of that issue. On the one hand, there is colonialism and there is issues of colonialism. And then on the other hand, there's issues of being colonized. So it makes it a very, very complicated thing to try to deal with.
Yeah, and again, like some of the work that I would do with the Ancestry, I I don't know, just for anybody who's not familiar with my take on ancestry. So I'm being very kind of maybe anti-American in this, but actually my position is very much that I don't care who has blood ties. I don't care, you know, what your DNA says or what your feckin' test that you bought off the internet says. If you're willing to put the work in with the culture and the language and all of those things, then, you know, your practice is as Irish as anybody else's as far as I can see. You do obviously get a boost up if you happen to have been born here in Ireland, because the land has a very particular energy, and the land and the spirits here are very, very strong for anybody working directly with that. So it's kind of like being able to, you know, maybe level up a practice in that it enables you to directly plug into it rather than having to go through different channels, if that makes sense. But, you know, all that being said, like, there's a huge amount of work that I would do with both community ancestry and spiritual ancestry. So not just bloodline ancestry. And the spiritual ancestry, I'd like to just kind of pick up on what you said there. Obviously, I am not mixed race. Well, maybe not obviously, sorry. But I am definitely not mixed race in any way. I do have a nephew who's half Chinese, so I'm aware of some of the energetic shifts that are happening around that. But you know, and within families and those kind of different ancestral lines coming in is an interesting one, again, energetically to deal with. Practically, it doesn't really make any difference to me or my nephew. But working with your own spiritual ancestry is something that I think maybe, you know, people who have an ancestral practice, I'm not sure that I've really seen it being, maybe it's being done privately, but I don't think I've seen it being addressed, you know, on any kind of grand scale publicly. And there's a lot of ways to kind of unpack that, as well as, you know, as well as just through your direct bloodlines. So there's a whole lot there that is going into the mix, and, you know, it's also complicated. So I suppose I didn't want to kind of, I know I came down very hard on colonial attitudes there, but I am aware of the bigger picture stuff, and it is work that I would do quite often. But, you know, at the same time, what we're speaking to that kind of mentality, that entitled mentality, I think is very, very valid and really needs, you know, people coming down on it very hard, whether that's in themselves or within their communities. I think it's really important, if that makes sense.
I think it's something that's going to be a long process for people to work on.
And how, in your own kind of practice with your ancestry, if you do, kind of, I'm presuming you do, but you may not, in your own practice with your ancestry, how have you kind of practically approached that? How have you incorporated that, or kind of tried to dig into it? If you would share some of that, maybe that would be useful for people.
I don't do a ton with ancestors. I used to do more. The majority of my relatives were Catholic, so I found I had a lot of my ancestors coming to me asking for masses to be said for them. And then much awkwardness ensued when I would go into the local Catholic church to have that done. Because, you know, if my grandmother wants a mass said for her on Easter, I've got no shame. I'll go into the church and ask. They put her name on a list. I don't know. You know, so I found that when it came to, you know, working with physical ancestors, that sort of became a bit of a block in a way for me, which was actually true when they were alive too. So it didn't change much after they died, I guess. And then looking at it from a non blood relative, you know, standpoint, you know, from a purely spiritual standpoint, I think for myself, I very quickly ended up getting sidetracked into the Aishi, which isn't entirely surprising because they have a lot of, my cat's walking behind me, because they have a lot of connections to the dead. So I think for myself anyway, the waters there got very muddy very quickly. I think other people would probably have a different experience with it. So I might not be the best example to discuss for this.
Fair enough.
But I do agree with you that it's a very important thing for people to do and to try to focus on and to connect with. I just found for myself that, much like a lot of other things in my life, things kind of went sideways with it, and it went in a different direction.
Yeah. You got fairy led, I think is it's the
story of my life.
Yeah.
My cat wants this involved.
Okay, so talking of Vivian earlier, she had a question that wasn't just telling us how pretty we were, which is nice. Thank you, Vivian. How can we best support authors? I didn't even read this. How can we best support authors and inspirations such as yourselves? I maybe would have edited it a little bit if I had just done anything other than copy and paste it in a flurry. Okay, how can we best support authors and inspirations such as yourselves? I see you as community organizers and inspirations. Vivian, really? Even if we don't have a solid named group for us or an actual organization. I'm thinking financially, emotionally, etc. How can we be in better balance as a community? Okay, so personally, I think we both have Patreons. Your Patreon is back up and running, isn't it?
It is. I restarted it a few months ago.
Excellent. So I've put my link in the chat for the Patreon, and it's actually there on the screen below. And yours is patreon.com/
Mórrígan Daimler.
Mórrígan Daimler. So very simple. So the Patreon thing is a really good way of supporting people who are doing work like artistic or creative or spiritual work that isn't, in the usual kind of mainstream of how people get paid. So for stuff like your blog and
the translation work
and various other things. So I really like the Patreon. I'm not a huge fan of crowdfunding personally for myself, for all sorts of weird and complicated reasons and associations I have with money and asking for help, which is very, very personal to me. It's not that crowdfunding is a bad thing in any way. So I had to climb over some of the stuff, some of my stuff to set up my Patreon. But I think what kind of convinced me was again, the ancestral connection that I would have with my ancestors who, would have either been craftspeople or nobles supporting craftspeople. It was very much a part of the Irish culture was to have that kind of class within society of people who, whether it was
that patron concept.
Exactly. And whether it was druids who, didn't have to put their hand in their pocket for a meal, and were free to focus on other stuff, or within a royal court or whatever, or literally craftspeople and artists who were able to do that. So I really liked that system for being able to support, and as you say, just being a patron of that person, and contributing a little bit. So that's one way, I think, and obviously that's a financial thing, but actually for me it's as much an emotional support. It's as much like a support to my confidence and my determination to keep doing the work that I'm doing. And when I see people are willing to to give me money just to do, well,
right.
Yeah, this is the imposter syndrome, and I think you suffer from that as much as I do. Do you want to talk about that so I don't have to talk about it anymore?
Yes, imposter syndrome is a terrible thing that pretty much regularly convinces people, and yeah, myself included, that this is all a sham and everything I've done has no value. And yeah, that, if people just knew how not good I was at everything, then yeah, it's See, I'm getting incoherent even trying to describe it.
Yeah, no, I get it. And even just hearing you describe it, I'm like, I'm a mess. I'm a mess. If people could only see, you know, and okay, I happen to be wearing pants today, but like I would just as easily be in my Batman, you know, trousers below the screen as anything else, you know. So yeah, it's very strong and very horrible.
It is. And I do think a lot of people struggle with it. Even people who seem very confident. Not so much, really. I would like to point out to Vivian, though, I am not a community organizer. No.
Okay. Yeah, Vivian can do the organizing.
Yes.
We could be inspirational and she could be the organizer. I think that would work very well for everybody, really. You're in very safe hands with Vivian.
Yes.
Okay, so to kind of see how we actually answered this question, I see you as community organizers and inspiration, even if we don't have a solid name group for us. Okay, so that's an interesting point. We don't have, like, we of the, maybe, you know, again, we could kind of use that loose umbrella term of Celtic, but maybe in the Celtic pagan community. I mean, for me particularly, that's Irish, but I know that there are other people who work with Scottish, and, you know, we would maybe be under the umbrella of the Mórrígan community loosely. You know, but so there's a couple of umbrellas we could kind of shove up over our heads for, even though we don't have that kind of name group or actual organization. But there is definitely like a community that is there, you know, through various kind of online groups. I know my own group, the Irish Magic and Spirituality one, that's very much a community for me. And it's, you know, it's one that I'm very territorial over. I keep very, very carefully managed and maintained. Don't put up with any nonsense. It's actually the one space on the internet where I don't have to put up with any nonsense. You know, I can be a complete dictator in there, and, you know, just be the grand high vizier of, you know, that particular group, and I don't have to be polite to anybody. It's fantastic. So yeah, so there are various community spaces that we can access online, and then obviously in person through various tours and events that we go to. And I think that I'm noticing changes in that already. I'm noticing that there, you know, people are stepping up. There's an awareness, a kind of a dawning awareness over the last couple of years that, you know, resources are important, and, you know, authenticity is important, and cultural appropriation is not cool, and, you know, racism and sexism are being rooted out very specifically in groups, which I know you're a moderator on the Call of the Mórrígan community, and that's again one of the few spaces that I've seen that just don't tolerate any kind of racism or misogyny or anything like that. So those are very valuable spaces, and I think that I feel that we are working towards that, you know, being a better balance as a community. But like, what do you need, or what do you feel that you need to keep doing the work that you're doing?
I mean, obviously, you know, support with people, you know, buying the books that I write, reading my blog, sharing it, commenting on it, preferably positive comments, but, you know, even disagreement, if it starts a discussion, you know, I'm in favor of. Ad hominems, not so much, but, you know, I've always taken the view that I don't expect everyone to agree with everything I say. I don't ever want people to think that, you know, I have that personality that if you disagree with me, then, you know, that's the end of all things. I like a good discussion. I like disagreement if it's coming from a good place. Different opinions are wonderful. Different facts are something else. I do think that our community in general needs to constantly work on differentiating between opinions and facts, but that's my own little hobby horse. So yeah, just reading what I write, sharing it, you know, I think that as a community, what I would like to see, which isn't so much about a personal support thing for me, but just, you know, talking about community being a better space, being able to have discussions that are disagreements without it immediately becoming defensiveness and attacking. Because I do see that a lot still online, where, you know, you can't disagree with someone's opinion even without it being perceived as an attack. And then it gets very emotional very quickly. And, you know, the Celtic Reconstructionist community has a lot of flaws. I would never say that it doesn't. But one thing that I do like about it, that I've always liked about it, is that you can get into some very intense disagreements with people and still be friends with the people afterwards. People don't take things personally. You know, I would like to see more of that. Guess we could say that's emotionally supporting me, because I like a good debate, and I love a good discussion, and I love learning something new. You know, if I'm wrong, and, you know, someone can show me that I'm wrong, and you know, sort of educate me in a way, I love that kind of stuff, and I will definitely correct myself, and change my opinion based on new information. But I would like to see that done in a context that doesn't involve, thank you, Laura, that doesn't involve, you know, ad hominems and sort of the crazy flaming stuff that goes on sometimes online.
Can you just define ad hominem, because I'm not 100% certain of that in context?
Yeah, an ad hominem is a type of logical fallacy. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of logical fallacies. I actually hate them with a passion, but I'm very familiar with them because they get thrown around a ton in the pagan community. An ad hominem is a personal attack. So if I say, I think ad hominem, if I'm remembering my Latin correctly, means against the person. If I were to say, you know, the Mórrígan isn't ever in love with Cuchulainn, which is an opinion that's debatable. You know, you can support it or deny it based on material in the mythology. And someone's response to that is, well, no, you're wrong because you're just a fucking idiot. That would be an ad hominem.
Right.
As opposed to saying, well, no, I disagree because, you know, if you look at this story and this particular thing, then you can see that she obviously did love him or whatever.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of people who just immediately go to the, well, no, you're stupid. So. Okay,
so hate the opinion, not the person.
That's basically an excellent way to put it. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Hate the opinion, not the person.
Yeah.
Or disagree with the facts, but don't blame the person who's giving you the facts.
Yes, and I mean, you know, anybody with a lick of sense obviously knows that the Mórrígan was never in love with Cuchulainn, but, you know, we can maybe discuss that at a different time. So you won't have any personal attacks from me for having that opinion. FYI.
That could be a whole hour-long discussion in of itself. And you know my opinion on that.
I do. I think it would be less a discussion and more a rant of, you know, everybody else is wrong and this is why. Okay, so that's our third interview scheduled and sorted, obviously. Let's talk about the boy is our third interview, I think, if you're up for that. A panel of Cuchulainn fields, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, let's not go down that particular track today. We'll save that for our next interview.
That'll be a pay-per-view interview.
Yeah, you need ringside seats for that one. We need to get in the opposing party. We'll have to find somebody who actually likes the boy and works with them. Maybe, yeah, there's a few. Maybe John Paul Patton would be a good one. Maybe. Anyway. So where are we? Okay, so just to recap, you can support us by not being a dick online.
It's a good
by
start.
by arguing if you come across an opinion that you don't agree with, argue against the opinion, not the person. Support us on Patreon, absolutely, financially if you can, and if you haven't got the funds to support us financially, then share the links. Share the links to the blogs, share the links to the events, share the links to the Patreon, spread the word about how amazing and awesome we are and all the work that we're doing.
I mean, I'm all in favor of people supporting the Patreon, and that's awesome. And I'm all in favor of people, buying my books. Also awesome. But I blog twice a week for free, because I know that not everyone can afford financially
Exactly.
to go out and buy books or to be a Patreon supporter. Although I try to offer some fun stuff on there, like I know that you do, for people who can afford it. But if financial support's not an option, free stuff, this is free. So, there's free stuff too. And that's support.
Yeah, and for anybody who has signed up to the mailing list just to get this wonderful free stuff, this mailing list is basically where I pretty much send out most of my free stuff. There's weekly or bi-weekly resources, depending on how busy I am, resources on Irish mythology, culture, heritage, spirituality, travel, blah, blah, blah. And, there's a lot of stuff that's happening for free. We put in a lot of time and effort into the groups that we run online, and as we've said, we run the Call of the Mórrígan community, Morgan's involved in as a moderator, and Irish Magic and Spirituality group, we're both in as well. And there's a lot of value to be had for no cash money. But if you can't afford cash money, that's obviously that would definitely help towards keeping the lights on and shit. Vivian just said there, Morgan just helped me give away a free scholarship to our next Ireland pilgrimage with airfare. Yeah, so that's another thing actually that's come into my practice, or has always been in my practice, and I'm seeing kind of spread out a little bit more in the community, which is great, is the idea of the scholarships and making sure that there's an option at least for somebody to apply for something that is a paid product, or Vivian says, like this scholarship, for example, would not have happened without Morgan and our friend Stephanie's help. And, those are really, really important and valuable ways to support within the community. And by, if you are in a position to financially support, us or people like us, then, that means then that we're in a position to support people who aren't financially able to access things that are, that are coming behind a paywall. So that is what goes around comes around, really, and that is really important, I feel, to kind of point out. So you're not just paying us, you're actually paying us to pay it back to the community as well. So that's really important work that I know you're doing, and I try to do as well, and Vivian does.
Another thing, and I forgot this, so I just want to mention it before I forget, and all of that you just said, definitely. Also book reviews, because this is something that I am terrible about asking people to do. And I'm not asking people directly, but if you read my book or Laura's books, and you like them, doing a book review for them on any of the sites, Goodreads or Amazon, that actually does make a really big difference.
Yep.
And I think people don't realize that, because I've had so many people tell me that they like my books, whether it's my fiction or my nonfiction. And I really don't get a ton of reviews written, for the amount of people that tell me they like my writing. And reviews matter. Word of mouth, just telling your friends. If someone says they're interested in Irish spirituality, I always recommend Laura's book. I actually like both of Laura's books, but I understand Laura prefers the newer one, so.
It has a place. The original one has a place. It does.
Everything has a place.
Yeah. And yeah, no, that's a really good point, and it's something I kind of forget as well, you know. And reviews for, you know, if you go to an event that we teach at or anything like that, or you know, you want to see us at an event, then talk to the event organizers. Tell the event organizers that you really liked our classes, or, you know, you really want to see us at events, because then obviously that encourages people to help with what we were discussing earlier, you know, the financial supports for actually getting us to events. Obviously I have to pay airfare from Ireland, and you have to pay airfare from Connecticut to wherever. And, you know, those are expensive fucking airfares, even with Vivian on our side, you know. And then you've got all the other expenses as well. So, you know, there's a lot that a really positive review and word of mouth and asking for us at events, you know, it all really helps. Now, I will kind of put the proviso there that I'm not traveling in 2018. So if anybody's asking for me for an event, it will have to be 2019 at least, and if I can avoid 2019 I will too. But you know, I'm kind of, if I could do a year on a year off, I think I would be able to cope with that.
Yeah, I'm pretty booked for next year. I don't do much. I have 3 children. One of them has medical issues, so you know, for me actually doing the 2 big trips and maybe Mystic South, and then I do the Mórrígan's Call retreat, which is actually in Connecticut, so I kind of don't count that.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's like an hour away. But doing those 4 things next year is pretty much what that's me
yeah,
booked.
you're maxed out. Yeah.
Yeah, and writing however many books I end up writing next year.
Okay, so for 2019, you can ask your local.
Yeah, and hopefully I will be back in Ireland in 2020. I'm poking Vivian about that. I just plan to keep coming back to Ireland and doing tours as much as possible. So
great.
Yeah, the more of that I do, the less events I do. So
yeah, and maybe we'll organize an event here. 2020 Mave tour with Lora and Morgan.
Yes, that's my plan.
That sounds good. Sounds good. And Ashlyn says, when you do decide to travel again, would you consider coming back to PantheaCon if people helped with your travel and speaker costs? Morgan, I presume that's for you.
It could be for you. It's for both of us.
Both, okay. Yes, I think so. I'm currently working with Llewellyn, so I will have to do PantheaCon at some stage, I'm sure, for book launches or whatever. And so I probably will be back to PantheaCon. I have serious personal issues around asking for money. I mean, I've no problem, you know, when I'm doing the amount of hard work that I'm doing, I've no problem kind of, you know, a fair wage for a fair day's work kind of thing. You know, that's perfectly fine. I've put it, you know, 25 years of honing this craft in, so I deserve to be paid for that, you know, and as do you, Morgan, just in case you needed to hear that. I kind of have, I don't know, I'm finding myself a little bit prickled by the idea of asking people to pay for me to travel. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I would be a maybe. You know, the financial thing's a big part of it. I also, this is probably a TMI for everyone. I have social anxiety that makes it really hard for me to travel by myself. So I have a travel buddy, which is my friend Mel.
Who's amazing.
Who's the most awesome, amazing friend ever. And she's been really good about going with me everywhere I've needed to go. So Mel deserves like a big shiny gold star and an award and a giant cookie. But you know, it's hard to get that much time to go out there, and it's very expensive. And I would definitely have to look at doing things differently if I considered doing it again. Last time we were actually in the DoubleTree, and there's a couple reasons why I think that wasn't the greatest idea on my part.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Yeah. The first time we were in one of the overflow hotels, I had just gone out with my friend Stephanie, and I actually think that was a better choice for where to stay. So I would have to really seriously crunch some logistics, as it were, if I was going to reconsider going out there. I
was the same, and I stayed. It was my third year doing Pantheacon, and I stayed in the DoubleTree this year for the first time, and had exactly the same. Well, maybe not exactly the same, but a very similar experience of like, this is a very different event when you're in that kind of miasma of energetic weirdness, fuckery, and all the rest of it. But
it's hard when there's no way to take a break from it. So that would be a different maybe.
So let's say we'll see. Okay, let's say we'll keep you posted, and we're not going to be at Pantheacon for 2018, and I don't know why I'm saying we, because we don't come as a pair, but Morgan already has her heterosexual life partner in Mel. She doesn't
That's how I introduce her.
Yeah, she doesn't need me. It's fine. But yes, we can maybe look at that for 2019, or 2020. We'll see. So I'm sure we have another question. I know that we have gone on for quite a while, as we are wont to do. Yes, and I mean we had 2 feckin' questions, and we're only getting to the second one now. So Bronwyn Stephanie Rogers of the Cauldron of the Celts asked, what is foundational to your practices? Foundational principles and foundational intangible practice.
My foundational principle is to make sure my liver stays inside my body and doesn't become a fairy snack.
Tasty.
Sorry. What's foundational to my practices? I would probably say reciprocity really is, when you get down to it, the most foundational aspect. I mean, I talk a lot about making offerings, and I think sometimes people sort of misinterpret that a little bit. Offerings aren't gifts. It's not like I'm giving a present when I'm giving an offering. The idea of an offering is to create the sense of reciprocity. And whether that's, making an offering to a power, one of the Aishi, who is generally not well inclined to humans, so that they will be slightly better inclined towards me, or whether it's making an offering to one of the Aishi who I feel has helped me out in some way, to sort of show my appreciation for that help. And in that case, I'm on the other end of that reciprocity. I've already received something, so I'm giving something back. Even when I'm dealing with the gods, it's kind of the same thing. I see it all, whether we're talking animism and dealing with, the spirits of the land around me, or the spirit of my car, or, the spirit of anything, or whether we're talking the fairies, or whether we're talking the gods. I see it all as about nurturing a relationship that's two-sided. That's my giving to them in some way, and then they're responding in some way, hopefully positively. So I would say that really, when you get down to what's the foundation of my practice, at the most bare bones, that's what it is. And you can fancy it up and, add to it or take away from it, but that's sort of the core of it. Obviously, the magical aspects, because I do practice witchcraft, is a whole other thing, which would be much more complicated to try to explain. I don't know that there's really a foundation so much to that. Just mute my phone. But, you know, ultimately I think that it's about that connection and that reciprocity. So offerings play a big part.
Okay. I would have a very similar, I'm not sure if this question is for you or me, so I better give an answer, or Stephanie or Branwen will kick my butt.
I'm curious to hear your answer, so.
I think there would be three things, which all happen to begin with C. Connection, and we've discussed kind of authentic connection, and, you know, working from that foundation is really important to me. Being aware of that kind of context and connection within communities and within culture, and it's all about the C's apparently. So so connection would be the first one, and, you know, forming authentic connections. Contract would be the second one, and, you know, I think maybe that's what you're touching on with reciprocity. All of my interactions, my practice is based on contract, is based on relationship, is based on, you know, I'm going to do this for you and you're going to do this for me. And that sounds very rigid.
Sounds very smart to me.
Yeah, very smart. Yeah. There is obviously a give and a take to that, you know, like any relationship, and it really is kind of modeled on what I would see as a, you know, healthy kind of human relationships as well, where there's a lot of communication. Another C. So there's a lot of communication and kind of checking in, and, you know, all of these things that go into forming good relationships. And those are all very, very foundational principles to my practice. And the third thing then would be consistency. For me, would be showing up regularly, you know, would be showing up every day, every week, whatever you commit to. You have to show up for that, you know, and that's part of keeping a healthy contract as well. That's part of keeping your connection healthy, you know, all of those things. And it really, like, a lot of it is common sense, and a lot of it is just you know, sitting down and thinking about, how can I be a good partner or a good friend in, you know, in this world. So what can I take from those lessons and model on my, you know, my principles and my practice when dealing with other world beings. And there is a lot, like, I would never show up at somebody's house and demand a present from them, you know.
Right.
And I would hope that most people wouldn't do that. Again, my culture is very much about hospitality and honor and, you know, respecting people's homes and their environments. Like, that's very, very strong for us here in Ireland. And I know obviously in a lot of places all over the world, but that's just, you know, that's where I grew up. And like, taking that and applying that, like, you know, why would I go to a sacred site, or why would I just, you know, do a ritual and summon somebody or something to me and then demand something of them, like, with no prior introduction or no prior show of good faith or no prior you know, connection or contract or commitment to them, you know. So I think you're spot on with the whole, you're making offerings. It's not a present, it's not a gift, it's part of that commitment and that kind of showing up, you know. Example, I was asked by I've been kind of loaned out from the Mórrígan. I've been apprenticed out to Monaghan and MacLear. I have to work with the sea, which I'm not a fan of. And, you know, a lot of stuff in my life. Yeah, no. It's all about the Shannon for me. I'm a river baby, I told you before. So the sea is very different. It's not that I can't, and it's not that I'm afraid of it, or it's just not mine. I you know, I don't like it, and it's not my water form, my preferred water form. So that's been a personal challenge for me. And to make sure that that happened, I ended up, you know, down here in Waterford. And for me personally, I think a lot of that is I want to do I want to continue with what I would see as pretty much as my life's work of mapping the other world, and forming a practice and forming a system almost that enables people to explore safely, to journey, to bring all those kind of what I feel is the lost kind of layer of we have kind of a disconnect between the old stories and the teaching tales and the practical kind of spiritual stuff that we know is done in other cultures. We have a disconnect between how those things kind of fit in the Irish spiritual traditions. So I would see my work as kind of having to map that, and it is lifetime's work because it's so vast and so huge. So for me then, part of that consistency and part of that contract, like I've been told that I need to get in the sea once a week. And, any time within each 7-day period, it doesn't matter when it is, just 7 days can't pass without,
Getting in the water.
a 7-day cycle, say. So like it just, without getting in the water. It could be at the start of one cycle and the end of another cycle. So it could be like, 12 or 13 days between them, but that's okay, as long as it's within that 7-day period. So they were very clear with that, and that's all part of my apprenticeship with Monaghan, and I'm not getting anything back. Morpheus Ravenna, I was talking to her about it the other day, and she was like, "Oh, I'm very curious as to." She's interested in devotional practices, and she's curious as to what I'm getting out of it and how my practice changes and all the rest of it. And my explanation of it was basically what I feel I'm doing right now is depositing in a bank account. If that makes sense, to show willing and to show faith and to start building that relationship, I need to show up. I need to show up on a regular basis. I need to be committed to that. I need to put my own shit aside and just do the work, and it's fucking hard. I'm a cold creature and I hate getting in the sea, and my mom gave me a wetsuit and that's making it slightly better, but there's a huge element to that, and that to me would be an example of that kind of foundational practice. So sorry to ramble on that, but so just to go back to kind of the offerings and the she, my sense, and now correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense of your work, say, before Ireland and after Ireland,
The whole life can now be divided.
yeah, there's just this very clear division.
Yeah.
So my sense of it would have been that before, you and I would have had a very kind of similar approach to the she, which would be to not approach the she.
Awesome.
Yeah, yes. To just do the minimum, be respectful, but not invite anything else really. And I found it interesting when you said that that had happened to you, because when I went in December of that year, last year, my site visit to Biddy Early's cottage. Biddy Early, just for anybody who doesn't know, is probably Ireland's most famous Banfasa wise woman, and she is said to have gotten her power from the fairies. So there's obviously a big connection there. And I was told when I went there that I had to start working with the she, and I kind of avoided it as well, and a little bit, and have been thrown into it a little bit. But I had an experience last month at a site of a positive experience with the she, which I haven't really had since I was a child. But I have been kind of, again, developing that relationship a little bit, and I'm hesitant to kind of talk about it because I don't want people thinking that the she are fluffy or easy in any way, because therein lies danger. But would you say that that's a fair kind of, that you've had to make those changes, in that you've had to you would have been happy enough to kind of avoid them or have minimal contact before, and you've been directed to start with a more interactive working relationship now?
I think it's complicated. I keep saying it's complicated. I've always seen them, even when I was very small. So for me, you know, choosing to interact or to not interact wasn't so much a choice. I've always encouraged other people to be extremely cautious. My cat's got to have her opinion here. And I've always been a big advocate for appreciating that they aren't, you know, fluffy little glittery Tinkerbells, that they are dangerous. So I definitely agree with that. You know, that before Ireland in particular, I was very cautious about encouraging people to reach out to them. I mostly advocated people who felt drawn to work with them to do so more in a framework of sort of distant respect. And if you want to try to, you know, engage with the other world in a witchcraft practice, to do so more focusing on house fairies, house spirits, spirits that already sort of are I don't want to say programmed, but inclined to want to be kind to you and to have a relationship with you. You know, your house spirit is already going to be on your side and want to have a good connection with you.
It's in their own interest, really, isn't it?
Right, exactly. Because they sort of already have that symbiotic thing going on. After Ireland, because of what happened specifically in Ireland, on Samhain, when I was on the hill, because during the ritual, I was sort of given a title that I hadn't expected, which was Priestess of the Aishi. And I chose to accept that. In fairness, I did not realize when I chose to accept it that it was going to just massively overhaul my entire life, but I probably should have seen that coming. At this point, because of the position that I'm in, and because I'm now in service, specifically to a fairy queen, I'm sort of more on their side of things, which I realize sounds a little crazy. So I'm more at this point advocating and writing for people to sort of be respectful of them and to remember why they need to be respected. So I feel in a way like my role sort of reversed from trying to protect people from them to more sort of advocating for them. Does that make any sense at all?
It does. It actually makes perfect sense. And I think it's work that they used to have a lot of people for. And we've kind of talked about that. We've touched on this, I think, before in the way traditionally we weren't supposed to address them or talk about them. It was kind of bad luck to talk about them. And, you know, yeah. And that's very much a part of the culture. But my sense of it for the last couple of years is that that has shifted or changed in that, well, I felt personally that I was kind of released from that and specifically told to educate on them and to talk about them. And that's how my first class, How Not to Get Fucked by the Fairies,
which is an excellent class, by the way,
came into being. Thank you. But, you know, like it was about working with the she, you know, and it is about being respectful and all the rest of it. And I felt that almost the kind of, you know, the traditional or historical, let's call it a gag order or a, you know, something like that, those boundaries had been lifted or were in the process of being lifted, certainly for specific people, but I think more generally across the board. And I have to wonder, is that because they haven't got people advocating for them now? They haven't got those allies in this world the way they used to, you know? And they haven't got the respect that they used to. They haven't got the awareness and the feed that they used to get, you know? So it makes sense to me that there would be an element of that, of them kind of having to lower their standards a little bit just because it's, you know, it's survival time. I don't know, does that make sense, or am I kind of pulling shit out of my arse now at this point?
Yeah, no, I think, and this is something, I mean, I was always sort of aware of it, but particularly in this last year, because I found my focus shifting and my writing focus shifting. Speaking of colonialism and entitlement and appropriation, the amount of material that's out there, the books that are out there, the online material that's out there, the people that put themselves forward as sort of experts on the fairies, that really are just coming at it from such a disrespectful angle, that have kind of taken the idea of fairies and turned them into sort of watered down angels with butterfly wings. It was always out there.
We're looking at you, Dorian Virtue.
She's definitely a major one, her and the fairyologists. But, you know, even beyond her, there's some people who, you know, if you ask people that are interested in this subject, that would name as, you know, really respectable people in the field, if you can say that pagan fairy lore has a field, that really their approach, and, you know, it's rooted in something I understand, not that I agree with it, but, you know, sort of that New Age Victorian view and then amplified and reimagined. But it really is ultimately just extremely disrespectful. And it takes them from something that used to be feared, you know, into something that is twee and is a joke. And, you know, it's a massive problem, and it's something that's been getting more and more extreme in the last few years, particularly because of social media, and how easy it is for things to proliferate online. You know, I had written today, and we'd been talking about the whole concept of elf locks being used as a term for dreadlocks. No, don't do that.
Don't do that.
No. But, you know, the whole real foundation of that happening has to do with the fact, ultimately, besides the hideous cultural appropriation on the dreadlocks end, has to do with the fact that the idea of fairies, for most people, is modern Disney Tinkerbell. You know, it's not something that they have any fear of at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something that has come up time and time again for both of us, I know, where, you know, particularly around the elf locks thing, where people are claiming that they have a cultural right to dreadlocks because they have some form of Celtic ancestry, and that, you know, like, again, without that kind of understanding that, like, when, you know, when our grannies were telling us about, or granddads or whoever were telling us about elf locks, like, yes, they are a real thing in our culture, but they are something that you would get that freaking comb out and untangle as quick as possible, because they are not something that you would be encouraging in your child's hair for those very reasons. I mean, there's reasons that there were, you know, candles lit around cradles was to keep the fairies away, you know, to keep the fairies away from your children. And there was rowan and all sorts of other little charms and things sewn into people's fucking clothes to keep the fairies away, little iron charms like that kids would wear to keep the fairies away. Elf locks were not something that would be encouraged in any way, shape or form within the culture. Yeah, no, it was always I mean, even little, you know, Irish American me, even I know that that's a bad thing. You know, at the least, it means that they're messing with you while you're sleeping. And there's no part of that has good to it. No. You know, and, you know, I was aware of the idea, if you wake up with the elf locks, then, you know, the child or adult would then sleep with iron safety pins, steel safety pins
attached to their clothes, was what I had been taught.
Yeah.
You know, as a protection after that, because you didn't want that kind of attention. But, you know, that's just one symptom, that aspect of it, of this loss of the culture, loss of the root culture, and this sort of watering down of the whole concept of them. And I think ultimately it just comes down to people don't really believe in them anymore. And I think that's something that they definitely would want to see changed.
Yeah.
They want the belief back.
Yeah. And yeah, so we're kind of, we're fairy doctors or fairy allies maybe coming forward. They're, you know, they're making their choices for people like that. So it's definitely something to be aware of going forward. I think that is, I was going to say an option. It's probably not an option. I think that it would be something that they would have to choose you for, which means that there's going to be a whole host of people who watch this video and are like, oh, they chose me.
Well,
you know,
good luck to you.
Yeah.
If that actually does happen, I don't necessarily recommend it.
Yeah.
If
you can possibly in any way get out of it, do that instead. Okay. So there is a question on the chat here. From Ashlyn. I've heard a lot about how important offerings are, offerings this, offerings that, but in my personal work, the other world beings I work with have been more focused on the work I do as a suitable offering, sometimes to the point of not caring about my offering completely in favor of, did you do what I asked? Do either of you have a similar experience? Oh boy, do we? Yes, we do. Very much so, I think. Morgan, would you like to take that?
I definitely, in my case, I think both apply. You know, I've told the story before about how, you know, I make weekly offerings. It used to be milk, now it's cream. And I always warn people when I mention this, if you start doing weekly offerings, you need to understand that they will expect weekly offerings after that. You can't just stop doing them, because once they have an expectation, they don't understand human limitations, I guess. Particularly when grocery stores are involved. I think if I had a cow and the cow went dry, they might be a little more understanding. But I've told the story before of how I had stopped due to finances. And, you know, the first week went by and I didn't make the offering. And the second week went by and I went grocery shopping and I was carrying the groceries in and I had a full gallon of milk pulled out of my hand. And it hit the ground and the entire plastic gallon burst and milk went everywhere, because they wanted what they felt they were due. You know, and you have to keep that in mind when it comes to physical offerings. So I actually advocate for people not to make physical offerings unless they're doing it just randomly once in a while or on a holiday. Don't get into a regular basis of it unless you're planning to be doing that forever.
Yeah, because that's a contract and that's the consistency and that's setting the expectations. It all ties back into that.
Yeah, and if you have that contract and you try to stop, they're going to take what they feel they're owed. And folklore tells us that too, but you know, that was my personal experience in my life as well. But yeah, there's also things that they will ask you to do. And if they ask you to do something, you know, it's not like your friend saying, hey, do you think you could remember to stop at the store on the way home and pick something up for me? Like they're not really asking so much as telling.
Yeah.
It just might be phrased as a request.
Yeah.
In my experience. And if you agree to do it, again, it's a contract at that point. If you say no, then that's one thing. But if you agree, yeah, I'll do this thing you want me to do, you're really committing yourself to doing it. So you just have to be cautious a little bit with that too. You know, I have to, one of the things that had happened again with me on the Hill last year and the whole priestess thing, which I obviously am not very comfortable talking about, which is why I'm being so weird about it right now. I can't cut my hair anymore. And I was in a situation where I had to trim it because I had colored it before the trip and I had fried it with bleach. And the ends were splitting and it was getting to where I was actually losing, the hair was breaking. And I was in a really bad position because I'd been told, don't do a thing. And sort of a compromise was worked out where someone else was permitted to trim a very small amount. But yeah, they don't play around. If you agree to do something, you better plan on doing it.
Yeah. And the idea of work as an offering, I mean, my example with Monaghan and MacLear and getting in the sea, that is an offering in itself, like, so when we're talking about giving offerings, it's not just butter or cream or alcohol or anything like that. It can be the physical doing the work as well, for example, on our tours, when I'm guiding for the Rathcroghan Day with various tour groups, we start at the well at Ogala Well, and one of the things we always do, it's something that I used to do when I lived there, but obviously I don't live there anymore, so I'm not doing it on a regular basis. So when I do get to the well, it's often clogged up and choked up with this pondweed, this green growing thing. So that has to be cleared out of the well. And at Mórrígan, you've seen it, and it happens every tour that I'm involved with. I make everybody get in and do the work, and that is an offering, and that's more important than buying a bottle of alcohol off the shelf and pouring it into the river. That physical act of doing the thing that I've been told has to be done is the important part and is the offering.
Definitely.
So I think we might have to finish up because we're hitting the 2-hour mark again. So just before we leave, it's not a question, but tell us about your books on fairies and any new projects you're working on. And I just realized that the copy of the new fairy book that you gave me to read is upstairs on my bedside locker, so I don't have it here.
And it's funny, tying into the last question, that particular book on fairies actually was done as an offering work. They had sort of asked that be written. Hopefully it was what they wanted.
So what's the title on that? And I'll just throw it in the chat. The full title.
I have to try to remember. Fairies. I always spell fairies, by the way, Fairies. Because that's how you find it in books on folklore and academic works. I realize there's a million ways to spell fairy. But it's Fairies, A Guide to the Celtic Fair Folk. Okay.
So I'm just going to throw that in the chat so people, and it's Moon Books, isn't
it?
Yeah.
Moon Books is my publisher.
Yeah.
I like them. They're pretty awesome. Yeah, I have a book called Pagan Portals, Fairy Witchcraft, which I wrote in 2014. I have a book called Fairycraft, and I think that came out last year in 2016. I'm not entirely sure, though. And then I have Fairies, which is coming out in December of this year. And then I just finished Traveling the Fairy Path, which is the third in the Fairy Witchcraft series. And that one should be out later next year, maybe August or September. I don't have a release date for it. It's in copy editing with my publisher at the moment.
Great.
Yeah. And my only other fairy-related thing that I have in the works with Moon, they have a new thing that they're doing. They have a blog on their website, and to promote sort of newer authors, they offer people the option to write a book one chapter at a time on the blog. And then if people like it enough, at the end of the year when the Pagan Portals, which are shorter books, are done, it gets published. Obviously, I'm not a newer author with them. I've gotten several books through them, but I had volunteered to write one with that format as well, because I thought it was a cool idea. People get to read the book as it's being written, 1 month at a time, 1 chapter at a time, and give you feedback. Tell you what they like about that chapter, what they feel works, what they feel doesn't work, and then you can sort of adjust it. And I really liked that interactivity with it.
Yeah.
So by the end of this month, it should go live. I'm doing a Pagan Portals on the Fairy Queens, because I like to live dangerously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm pretty excited about that one. There's really not too much out there specifically on them. There was an anthology that was done on the Fairy Queens through, I think it's Avalonia Press, but it's an anthology. So, some of the material is better than other material in it. And I'm excited to see how much responsiveness I get from people.
Yeah, that should be really good.
Yes. Vivian. Yeah, I've been talking about, I would like to do a Sacred Sites tour in Ireland at some point after 2020, focusing on going to some of the different sites that have associations specifically with the Sidhe.
So the Caves of Kesh and Knockma and a couple of others.
Yep. Of course, my mind is going to go blank now. There was quite a few. I came up with a whole list of.
There's Breleth and Longford. I know we have Anne.
Breleth on the list.
Yeah, up in the Ardagh Heritage Centre. They're really, really good for Mither and Eton mythology and all the rest of it. But you should definitely look them up. I'm just going to throw that in the chat while I think of it.
Yeah, and I think we'd also, I was talking about this with Vivian, I think we'd also mentioned Dún Angus and a couple other sites. Obviously, I mean, we're trying to specifically hit on places that aren't necessarily on the beaten path, so to speak. Places that people don't necessarily always go to or know the folklore of, which, in all honesty, this is just my attempt to see every single square foot of Ireland.
Yeah.
It's shameless, I know, but there we are.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if there's no other questions, I'm just looking at how people can best get in touch with you. Oh, actually, you're not on Facebook at is it /Mórrígan Daimler still?
Yep, that's my author page.
That's your author page. That's perfect.
Yep, that is a good way to get in touch with me. And I do have a Facebook page, but if you just search Mórrígan Daimler, you'll find me.
Yeah, and I've put the link in the I've put the link in the chat to your. Did I put the link into your Patreon? Let me just check.
Patreon's also just my name, so
I
try to keep everything just my name.
That's perfect. I did put the link into your blog earlier on, so that's again, as we said, that's a very fantastic free resource. So
I think Aisling has a question.
Yeah, Aisling. So yeah, we've got your Patreon, your blog, your Facebook, and your publisher then is Moon Books, where your books are also on Amazon, aren't they?
Yep, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and then my fiction and my translation, you can get it right on lulu.com.
Great.
LULU.com.
Great. Do you have a website?
I do.
I do, she says hesitantly.
I'm trying to think if I can remember. It's a Yola site.
Okay.
So Yola Mórrígan Daimler. It's terrible that I can't remember this.
Okay, we will link. I'll put a link to your website. I'll put a link to your website in the Facebook event. How about that?
Okay.
So people can find you there. So I'm
very bad at self-promotion.
I know. I'm helping. Okay, so Ashlyn's question. I have mental health issues that prevent me from being more regular in my practice. I also don't have proper insurance to get it fixed. How can I mitigate this to stop pissing people off? My suggestion would be to, again, it goes back to contract, and if you are very clear with the beings and the deities or the spirits or entities or whoever you're working with, the ancestors, whoever, if you're very clear with them kind of what you can and can't offer, and you're asking appropriate reciprocal favors, for want of a better description, but reciprocal work based on what you can contribute, and that's your contract, then that's the basis of your contract. I would say that that's not a problem. I think the problem is where people, as Morgan has already said, problem is where people kind of commit to something that is then expected, because that's your contractual obligation then. So Morgan, do you have anything else on that?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think just being upfront with them, in my experience, both the fair folk and the gods don't always understand human limitations particularly well. But if you sort of go to them in whatever context you choose, meditation, journeys, prayer, just stand in the woods and talk to them, however you normally would do this, and just say, listen, I'm doing the best I can, but I have certain things that I'm struggling with, or, right now I'm having certain difficulties. I find that they can be understanding. They can also sometimes be helpful in finding ways or making things fall into place for you to be able to deal with the situation, so that you can do what they want or what they need you to do.
Yeah, I was going to say that, the obvious thing not to overlook is to ask them for help or support with that, so that you can do better or more work for them, because that's a bargaining chip right there. And that would be something that I would employ, again, with my own kind of mental health issues and ongoing problems. That would be something that I would employ on a very regular basis. It's like, if you want me to do this work, then you give me the supports, or the funding or the facilities or whatever I need to enable me to actually do that work. And that works because you have set up your relationship on that contractual basis, so there is that kind of wiggle room to do that. I found.
Yep. No, I agree. And I would say the exact same thing, pretty much. Don't be afraid to be honest with them about your limitations, and don't be afraid to ask for help from them. Okay,
well, that was awesome as ever. Thank you very much. I'll be in touch about scheduling our Cuchulainn I was going to say rant, but we'll try and get some balanced. I don't know. Does he deserve it? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how that works out. Anyway, more next time. Okay. So thank you so much, Morgan.
Yeah, thank you for having me. That was a lot of fun.
Very welcome.
Thank all of you guys who showed up for 2 hours.
Yeah. Good job. And for anybody watching the video later on, well done. Okay. So we're going to finish there, and thank you very much, and we will see you again shortly. So slán.
Have a good day.
You too.